the Z4m Coupe. And I kind of just wanted to give my 4 months of thoughts, review what I like, what I don't like about the vehicle. Especially coming from last year, I had, I think, a total of 7 vehicles, maybe 5 vehicles, some of which included the BMW 135i, which was, there's similarities, but further distance between vehicles than you would think, even though they're both BMWs, both coupes, both smaller cars, this one being 2 seats, that one being a 4-seater. Both stock. This one's on a stock suspension. I really haven't modified anything since I picked it up. I like to enjoy my BMWs in stock form. And then, you know, I also had 350Z, the 2004, so it wasn't the Rev Up or the HR. And I also had a Honda S2000. Sorry for the camera movement here. We don't have a proper mount yet. The S2000 was the AP1. So, you know, you get that 9,000 RPMs. And both the 350Z and the S2000 were, I would say, highly modified. Well, at least for me, highly modified. No engine. I don't really modify engine because I like to enjoy natural aspirated engines the way they come. But the 135i, for example, I say I didn't modify it. I did JB for it because, you know, with those turbo engines and being so easy to upgrade the power, why not, right? So I bought a used JB4 and I kind of played with it on Map 5 for a little while. And I had that 135i for, I think, 2 or 3 years. I have the details on my wheel well. That was like my first purchase out of college for a newer car. Hear it rev out a little bit. Oh, that engine, that beautiful M engine, straight 6, naturally aspirated. 333 horsepower, creamy, smooth. Yeah, I had that 1 Series. It was my first car out of college, and you know, I got that car at 50,000 miles stock, and that car to this day probably is one of my all-time favorite cars. And before that, I had a 325 Ci, the E46, 2004, with a bolt-on supercharger. So that was a modified BMW. It was supposed to be rated around 315 horsepower, similar figures to the stock 135i, but the torque was completely different, where you could really tell the turbo made a car feel a lot faster. I think those cars weighed about the same. But yeah, the 135i, I think that was the best all-around car that did everything. This car, however, people say it's more raw. It is, than a 135i. It's not as soft. That, especially, the suspension is, you know, BMW has some issues with small bump compliance. They're not a coilover company by any means. Whereas on the S2000, I had KWV3 coilovers. And in comparison to the S2000, to the Z4m Coupe, the interesting thing is the KWV3 coilovers, although the S2000 is by no means a more comfortable car, those coilovers transformed that car to where the suspension ride over small bumps and things, you didn't have to worry about. But it was a rougher ride because of these seats. You didn't have the amenities. It was a smaller, tighter vehicle. You know, the chassis rigidity, where this one is super rigid as well, but when you have the stock suspension, you have more air in proper set of coilovers. I think that does wonders for a vehicle, especially. I've tried the BC Racing coilovers on the 350Z, and then I've done stock multiple times. I had KWV3s on the E46, and then I had KWV3s on the S2000. And I can tell you that's probably the best coilovers I've been on out of the 2 or 3. I had Yannica's when I first bought the S2000, some cheap Japanese ones. I had BC Racing. There's a night and day difference between a proper set of coilovers and the cheaper stuff. And then there's a big difference from stock, where stock is tuned better for comfortable and everything. KWV3 is really, it specializes. Certain coilovers specialize, and it makes it where small bump compliances, all those things that you don't like about the stock suspension or slop, kind of goes away. As being raw, well, coming from an S2000, I can tell you it's not. People say that, but you know, if you're coming from Japanese cars, 350Z was a heavier Japanese car. The S2000 felt Spartan compared to the 350Z. Yeah, it's raw in a way that maybe if you've never driven a sports coupe, a two-door, those kind of things. Coming from Mercedes, a standard sedan, 3 Series, those kind of things that are stock suspension, you know, it can be intimidating and a little bit harsh. But you know, coming from an S2000, a 350Z, even something like a Hyundai Genesis, another 3 Series coupe, it's about the same, especially being a 2007. I would say comfort goes, it's on par, if not better, than the E46 sedans. The Hyundai Genesis is a clunky, heavy vehicle to me when I drive it. The suspension is sloppy. It's not any less comfortable than those vehicles. I think with a great set of coilovers, it can be really comfortable as well. So on that point, I'm not sure. You know, when they say it's maybe the gearbox, because the gearboxes can be clunky. You know, it's not that bad, to be honest with you. 135i, yeah, a little more comfortable, but you know, it's a 2-door coupe that it used to be a convertible. How much more comfortable can you make it? And like for the S2000, when there was wind noise, there is none in this vehicle. Refinement is probably the best word for how to describe the ride when you come from RX-7, you know, FD, RX-7, the previous gens, S2000, MR2, 350Z, maybe even the G35, which I've driven. Even the new Hyundai Genesis, the refinement is on par, obviously, but I would say much better than all those vehicles. I don't get wind noise. The only cabin noise I get, they don't have to muffle it in through the speakers in this vehicle, because you know, it's got that refinement, but it doesn't have the refinement of the new BMWs, and so you can actually hear your engine and exhaust, which is, I think, a big plus for me. Engine performance is, you know, everything you could expect from the last of the great straight 6M motors, especially with individual throttle bodies. That platform being, what was it, 10 years old by the time they created this vehicle, you can expect reliability not to be an issue, and that's kind of why I went ahead and I bought it at higher mileage. You know, like this vehicle, when I bought it, by no means is it new or low miles. I got this vehicle at around 90,000 miles, but I got a steal. I bought this particular vehicle when it needed a lot of maintenance, and the previous owner just neglected to do. And it's just one of those things when you know that people who don't know cars, and maybe they buy a vehicle and they don't know what the maintenance cost is going to be. But you know, when you buy a BMW, you just got to know basic things like valve cover gaskets, you're going to get those oil leaks. Ignition coils, spark plugs, you know, a typical clutch when you buy a manual. I haven't had to do the clutch on this particular vehicle, knock on wood, but you know, it's coming up there, 90,000 miles. I don't know if it was already replaced or not. Yeah, so like things like brake pads, brake rotors, front. I haven't done the pads yet, but I had to do the rotors. She didn't do the brake sensors. The airbag light was on. The TPMS light was on. I changed the tires. I didn't put the TPMS back into these wheels because I'm gonna have to change when I change the wheels, excuse me, I'm gonna have to change the tires anyway, and I'll just get the TPMS put in when I put the tires on. But like the brake pads, I haven't changed those either. And you know, when you change the brakes, you have to do the brake sensor. She didn't do the brake sensor and tried to be cheap, and so what happens is you got a brake light and a TPMS light on the dash. You know, maybe normal buyers would be scared and not know what those lights are, but I'm well aware of what it is and how much they cost to do, and that's typical maintenance I want to do anyway. You know, like oil change. I did the valve cover gasket, spark plugs, ignition coils, rotors, wheels, tires. So those are all the things that I'm going to do anyway. So when I go to buy a vehicle, I don't mind that it's not done. You know, what I look for is the title. I want it to be clean, accident-free preferably, and mileage doesn't generally bother me, especially not with BMWs, or at least not with a platform that's proven 10 years. Looks-wise, yeah, it's a really, really good-looking car. I think it's got one of the best backs, the best asses I've seen on a vehicle. I like the 1M personally on the back. I like the S2000, yes. I don't mind the 350Z. I think it looks a little bit awkward how rounded it is. What other cars have a great back? You know, this to me looks a little bit, if you look at it at certain angles, it looks like a Ferrari. And that's what really I like the most, especially about the coupe. I'm not speaking for the convertible, obviously. But I always loved the quad tips on the M cars, that signature that they started doing after the E36. What else? So, you know, handling's really, really good. The engine, you can't complain. It's the S54. You can't complain about that. It's probably one of the biggest reasons to buy the vehicle. You've got comfort compared to any sports car. This is probably the best middle ground between a Grand Tourer and a sports car to me. Whereas I drove it 7 hours, for example, from where I picked it up in Savannah, Georgia, and I stayed down South Florida. 7 hours on the road, and I had no issues. In fact, probably the only issue I had was about 6 hours in, my back started hurting a little bit, and that's because whereas the 135i has that lumbar support that's adjustable, this does not. And if I had to make a complaint, about the seats, it would be the lumbar support. This one is not adjustable. The 135i was adjustable, and that's probably the only thing, you know, that the typical BMWs get, where this car as a sports coupe / what's supposed to be a convertible with the sports seats, you get more of like a bucket seat. It's more sporty. So yeah, it's raw in that sense, but it's not S2000 raw. S2000s have leather dash, those kind of things, whereas the 350Z, I'll even say that the 350Z, if you talk about luxury and looks on the interior, what you're looking at every day, 350Z probably had one of the worst interiors I've been in, and that's one of the reasons I got rid of that car so quickly. The E30, you can't really compare to old cars, but the E30, that's a Spartan vehicle, right? I had a convertible E30, and you know, there was a lot of wind noise, there was exhaust noise, there was the antiquated dash that was cracking in my particular vehicle. The seats were nice, they were very comfortable, they're sports seats, just kind of like this, but at the same time, that's an old vehicle, so you can't really compare. Is this like the E30 of today? For BMW, I'd say yes. But if I'm going to compare an E30 to like what is a closer vehicle to an E30 than this, I would definitely say an S2000. I mean, in every way, that's the most Spartan, modern classic I can think of feel that I've driven personally. It's a true sports car. It's got space in the trunk. It's got enough seats for 2 people. It's got everything great that BMW did from the 2000s and 99s. It's got the newer limited slip. It's got the newer interior. It's got, you know, all the pluses of the current BMWs with the positives of the previous BMWs when they were really visceral. And in that way, I would say this is probably one of the best BMWs I've owned out of the E30 325i. I had the 325 CI supercharged E46, the 135i, the 325 E46 all-wheel drive XI. I've driven E36 M3. I've driven a 650i last gen. I've driven, you know, a lot of BMWs. As you can tell, I'm kind of a BMW fanboy. I mostly enjoy German. But yeah, best BMW by far, bang for the buck as of right now. You know, you can get one of these in the 20s. Higher mileage ones are going to be, you know, 20, I would say around 25 is reasonable right now. This is beginning of 2018, right? So the prices now are, you know, 25 grand. You can get a decent 70, 120, 150,000 mile vehicle. Whereas you can't really beat that if you're going to find something that in this category as comfortable as this.